The arena hadn't seen Hank Carver in over 5 years. Most folks thought he'd never return, not after the accident. The sun burned low over the Texas sky, casting long shadows across the dust and metal of the rodeo grounds. Every eye in. The stands followed his slow, measured steps as he entered the ring. He didn't wave. He didn't look up. Just walked, shoulders stiff, face like stone, toward the center of the arena that once made him a legend and later broke him. He wore the same brown boots he had on the day his son died here. Caleb was 23, full of fire and stubborn as hell. Hank told him not to get on that bull. Told him twice. But Caleb smiled, tipped his hat, and did it anyway. What followed was the kind of memory Hank tried to drink away for years. Hooves, dust, blood, and silence. That same kind of silence was creeping in now, like the past had come to watch too. The chute rattled behind him. The bull inside wasn't named, and Hank didn't care to ask. He wasn't here to ride. He wasn't even sure why he was here. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a promise he made at his son's grave and never had the courage to keep. All he knew was that the moment he stepped back into the dirt, something inside him stirred. Something cold, familiar, and unfinished. Then the gate flew open. The bull came out fast, angling toward him with wild power and reckless weight. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed, but Hank didn't move. Didn't blink. He stood there, hands by his sides, staring straight into the storm coming for him. And just before the beast could hit him, it stopped, dead still. A cloud of dust rose around them as the animal dug its hooves into the dirt. Its chest heaved. Its eyes locked on his. And Hank stared back like he recognized something. They stood like that, man and beast, in perfect silence. The kind that shakes you more than any noise ever could. Somewhere in the crowd, a child whispered, "Why? Didn't it hit him?" But no one answered. No one could. Not even Hank, because what he saw in that bull's eyes wasn't rage. It was recognition, and that scared him more than anything else ever had. He stepped back once, just once, and for the first time in years, Hank Carver felt something he didn't know how to name. The bull was led away slowly, still glancing back at Hank like something had passed between them. The handlers moved cautiously, whispering among themselves. Hank didn't move. His boots stayed planted in the dirt like roots. He could feel the stares from the stands, but they didn't matter. What mattered was that, for a moment, he hadn't been alone in his grief. That animal, wild, untamed, had looked at him with something human, and it rattled him to the core. Jesse Rayburn was waiting by the gate, the same age as Hank, but rounder now, slower. His voice had grown rough over the years, like gravel, caught in dry wind. "What the hell was that, Hank?" he asked, not angry, just stunned. Hank didn't answer right away. He brushed the dust off his jeans and glanced up at the bleachers. A few familiar faces, a few ghosts. "I don't know," Hank finally muttered, but it wasn't nothing. They sat later on the tailgate of Jesse's truck, just outside the arena fence. The sun was dipping low behind the bleachers, and the cicadas had taken over the soundtrack of the evening. Jesse opened a cold beer, handed it to Hank, then leaned back with a sigh. "You really didn't come back to ride, did you?" Jesse asked. Hank shook his head. "No, I came back to remember." Jesse looked at him carefully, like he was searching for the version of Hank that used to laugh, used to fight, used to care. But that man died in the same dust Caleb bled into. "I've been thinking," Hank said after a long pause. "What if I didn't come back just for Caleb?" Jesse's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Hank didn't answer at first. He just stared out at the empty arena, where the last light of day danced over the dust. That bull, it looked at me like it knew me. And I ain't saying I believe in anything strange, but he stopped himself. Jesse waited. But it felt like I was supposed to be here tonight. There was something Jesse wanted to say, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a small box. Wooden, old, worn. I was going to give this to you 5 years ago, but I figured you weren't ready. He handed it to Hank. No label, no name, just silence. Hank stared at the box like it might burn his hands. "What is it?" he asked. Jesse didn't blink. "Something Caleb left behind." And just like that, the weight Hank carried grew heavier, but now it had a shape. The box sat between Hank's hands like it was alive. Small, made of cedar, and held together with rusted brass hinges. It had the kind of weight that didn't come from wood. He turned it once, then again, looking for a latch or some clue as to why Caleb would leave it behind. Jesse said nothing, just watched. The sun had gone completely now, leaving the parking lot in a soft blue hush, broken only by the hum of bugs and distant car engines pulling away. Hank finally opened it. Inside was a folded letter, a pocket knife Caleb had carried since he was 12, and a faded photo of the two of them standing outside the barn, Hank with his arm draped loosely over Caleb's shoulder, both squinting in the sun. There was dust on their boots and a kind of ease in their smiles that Hank hadn't seen in years. But it was the letter that pulled him in like a hook through the chest. It was addressed in Caleb's handwriting, "For when he's ready." His fingers shook as he unfolded the page. Caleb's voice echoed off the ink, scrawled in messy loops. "If you're reading this, it means you finally came back. I don't know if that makes me proud or worried. Maybe both. There's something, I need to say, something I never could when we were both alive and mad at each other." Hank had to stop reading. He swallowed hard. His eyes were hot, but he wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not yet. Jesse looked away, giving him a moment. After a deep breath, Hank continued reading. The letter wasn't long, but it was raw. Caleb spoke about the pressure of being Hank's son, the legacy of Rodeo, the expectations, the fear of not being. "Enough. I didn't ride to prove I was brave. I rode because I didn't know how else to talk to you. That bull, that day, I wasn't showing off. I was just trying to be seen." That line hit Hank like a blow to the ribs. How many chances had he missed? How many words had he never said? Jesse spoke up gently. "He wrote it a few days before, you know." Hank nodded. He knew. Every detail of that week lived in his mind like a scar. But he didn't know Caleb had been carrying that kind of hurt. "Why didn't he just tell me?" Hank muttered. Jesse sighed. "Because you didn't look like a man who wanted to hear it." The truth sat heavy between them. As Hank folded the letter and placed it back in the box, he looked out into the darkness, where the arena stood empty and quiet. But something inside him had changed. He could feel it. The ghosts weren't just memories anymore. They were unfinished conversations, and now they were starting to talk back. The next morning came heavy and gray, with clouds hanging low over the hills like they were waiting for something to break. Hank sat alone on the porch of his small ranch house, the cedar box still beside him. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Caleb's handwriting and heard that line again. "I was just trying to be seen." That single sentence had carved itself into his chest like a brand. It kept asking one question over and over. Why hadn't he seen it sooner? Coffee in hand, Hank stared out at the pasture. The grass was dry, the fences leaning a little more than they used to. Time had a way of wearing down everything: land, wood, memory. He remembered how Caleb used to ride through that field, bareback sometimes, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. But maybe that was the problem. Caleb had been good at hiding what hurt, and Hank had been too proud or too blind to ask. Mid-morning, Jesse showed up without calling, like he always used to. He leaned against the porch rail, holding a paper envelope. "You might want this," he said quietly. "It's not from Caleb. It's from someone else." Hank took it slowly. No return address. Just his name on the front. Hank Carver, in careful handwriting that looked vaguely familiar. He didn't open it right away. His hands were already full with ghosts. Jesse sat down beside him and lit a cigarette. "It's from Grace," he said after a long pause. Hank turned to him, still as stone. "Grace who?" Jesse didn't answer. At first, he just looked out at the field. Grace Langford. From Amarillo, you remember. The name hit Hank like a cold wind down his spine. He hadn't heard it in over 30 years. Grace was a part of his life he buried deep, before Caleb, before Eleanor, before everything. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single page. Typed. Simple. "I heard about Caleb. I'm sorry. You and I had unfinished things. I need to speak with you. Not for me, for someone else." No signature beyond the first name. No explanation. Just enough to reopen. A wound Hank thought he'd left behind in the dust of another life. He folded the letter without a word. Jesse didn't press. He knew better, but the air between them had changed. Now, it wasn't just about Caleb. It wasn't just about guilt. Something else, something from before, was coming back. And this time, Hank wasn't sure he could keep it buried. 3 days later, Hank drove to Amarillo without telling anyone. He didn't pack much. Just a change of clothes, a flask he hadn't used in years, and the letter from Grace folded neatly in his back pocket. The road stretched long and empty. Ahead of him, familiar yet foreign. Every mile felt like peeling back a layer of something he didn't want to remember. But whatever waited at the end of that drive had already begun haunting him. He pulled up to a modest white house on the edge of town, where the grass grew patchy and the porch swing creaked in the wind. Grace Langford opened the door before he knocked. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was streaked with gray now, pulled back in a loose bun, and her eyes, still sharp, held a kind of quiet sorrow. She looked at Hank like she'd been expecting this for years. "You came," she said softly. Hank nodded. "You called." Inside, the house smelled like old wood and strong coffee. Grace poured them both a cup without asking and led him to a small kitchen table. No photos on the walls. No noise in the background. Just the sound of spoons clinking against ceramic mugs. "You never answered my letters," she said. Hank stared into his coffee. "I wasn't the kind of man who knew how." She gave a sad smile. "No, you weren't." Then she stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on the table in front of him. It was of a boy, maybe 15, with dark hair and Caleb's eyes. He was standing next to Grace, smiling nervously, wearing an old denim jacket too big for his frame. "His name is Nathan," she said. "He's mine. And yours." Hank's heart stopped. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The weight of the moment crashed down on him like a collapsed barn roof. "I never wanted to keep it from you." Grace continued, voice steady but soft. "But you were already building a life. You had Eleanor. You had Caleb. And I was alone. I didn't want to be the woman who broke up a family." Hank leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. All these years, another son. A second life he never knew he missed. And now, Caleb was gone, and Nathan was out there, not even knowing who he really was. The silence between them stretched thick and painful. Grace finally whispered, "He deserves to know." Even if it's late, Hank didn't answer. He couldn't. All he could see was Caleb's face, and then this boy's overlapping in his mind. Like two truths he wasn't ready to hold at the same time, the drive back to the ranch felt twice as long. Hank didn't turn on the radio. The only sounds were the hum of tires on cracked asphalt and the restless thoughts clawing at his mind. Nathan. The name bounced around in his head like a loose bullet. He had another son, one who grew up without him, one who never got to know the man Hank used to be, or the one he became after Caleb died. Back at the ranch, the place felt different, emptier, somehow. Hank stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the wind push the dry grass into waves. The barn creaked behind him. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled lazily in the sky. He lit a cigarette, even though he hadn't smoked in years. The first drag burned his chest like penance. Maybe that's what this was, a reckoning, one he'd managed to outrun. Until now, he spent most of that night in the barn, sitting in the old tack room where Caleb used to hide when he didn't want to talk. Hank sat there in silence, staring at nothing, thinking about everything. Was he ready to meet Nathan? Good. What if the boy hated him, or worse, didn't care? What would he even say? I wasn't there, but I'm here now? It sounded pathetic even in his own mind, thought by morning. Jesse showed up again like clockwork. He didn't knock, just stepped into the barn and sat down beside Hank without a word. After a minute, he finally asked, "You gonna tell me what happened in Amarillo?" Hank didn't look at him. "She had a son," he said flatly. Jesse blinked. "Yours?" Hank nodded once. "Looks like Caleb, same eyes." Jesse let out a low whistle, then leaned back. "Man, you don't do anything halfway, do you?" Hank finally looked over at him. "I don't know what to do." Jesse shrugged. "You already know. That's why you're tearing yourself up like this." Hank stared down at his hands. They looked old, tired. The hands of a man who'd held too much, let go of too much, and now didn't know how to hold anything without it breaking. "I don't even know what kind of father I'd be now," he muttered. Jesse stood. "Then don't try to be a father. Just try to be honest." That night, Hank sat at the kitchen table and picked up a pen for the first time in a long time. He didn't know how to begin, but somewhere in the quiet, he wrote the words, "Dear Nathan." And just like that, a new chapter began. 1. He wasn't sure he deserved to write, but had to anyway. Nathan agreed to meet him in a park just outside Lubbock, neutral ground. Grace had called it. Hank arrived early, parking his old truck beneath a row of cottonwood trees. He sat behind the wheel for 20 minutes before stepping out, adjusting his hat like it was armor. He didn't know what he expected, but his heart hadn't beat this hard in years. He wasn't riding bulls anymore, but it sure felt like he was climbing into the chute again. When Nathan walked up, Hank recognized him instantly. Same build as Caleb at that age, same serious eyes. But there was something else. A guardedness, like the boy had learned to keep his heart locked behind a door no one had a key to. Nathan stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, shoulders stiff. "You're Hank," he said flatly. Hank nodded. "I am." The silence that followed was thick and awkward. Hank wasn't a talker on the best of days, and Nathan clearly wasn't going to make this easy. Finally, Hank said, "I don't know how to do this." Nathan shrugged. "Me neither." They sat on a bench nearby, facing a quiet pond where ducks drifted lazily in circles. For a while, they didn't speak. Hank had brought the letter he wrote, folded and worn from being read and rewritten. He handed it to Nathan without a word. Nathan took it, unfolded it slowly, and read in silence. His face didn't change. Number. Tears, no anger, just quiet focus. When he finished, he folded it again, placed it in his jacket pocket, and said, "Thanks." That was all. But Hank felt something shift in that moment. Not forgiveness, maybe, but acknowledgement. The first brick pulled from a wall built over 17 years. Hank cleared his throat. "You ride?" he asked, grasping for anything familiar. Nathan shook his head. "No, I work at a feed store. Never liked rodeos." Hank smiled faintly. "Can't blame you." Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Lighter, somehow. Nathan looked out over the water. "So why now?" he asked. Hank took a long breath. "Because I lost a son and didn't want to lose another without trying." Nathan didn't respond, but his shoulders relaxed just slightly, and for Hank, that was enough. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Yous don't rewind just because you show up. But as they sat there, two strangers connected by blood and pain, Hank realized something. This meeting wasn't about the past. It was the start of something new, fragile, uncertain. But a week later, Nathan pulled into the gravel drive of the Carver Ranch. The house looked like something from a different time. Weathered wood, a front porch that had seen too many summers, and silence hanging over it like a heavy coat. Hank stood near the barn, a shovel in hand, turning over dry soil near the fence. He didn't wave, just gave a nod. Nathan returned it with the same quiet energy. Neither of them needed small talk. "Not yet. This place is older than I thought," Nathan said, stepping out of his truck. Hank gave a half smile. "So am I." They stood there a moment, looking out over the land. The pasture stretched wide and golden, touched by the late afternoon sun. "I used to ride through that field with your brother," Hank said finally. Nathan looked toward the fence. "You talk about him a lot." Hank didn't answer right away. "I think about him more than I talk. But maybe that's part of the problem." Inside the barn, time felt like it hadn't moved. The same saddle Caleb used still hung on the wall. His name was carved into a beam above the stall, a simple reminder of a life once lived at full speed. Nathan ran his fingers along the wood, absorbing the history like heat from a fire. "I never knew him," he said softly. Hank stood behind him, arms crossed. "You two would have gotten along, or maybe fought like hell." They worked side by side that afternoon, fixing a busted gate and feeding the horses. The rhythm of labor filled the space where words couldn't. It wasn't bonding, exactly, not yet, but it was something. And Hank could feel the silence between them changing. Less sharp, less defensive. Like two men carrying different kinds of grief, but beginning to understand each other's low dot. As the sun dipped below the hills, they sat on the porch drinking coffee from mismatched mugs. "Why didn't you come find me sooner?" Nathan asked, voice low but steady. Hank stared into the horizon. "Because I was too busy being someone I didn't even like," he said, "and too scared to find someone I didn't deserve." Nathan nodded slowly, not as a response, more like an acceptance. "I'm still not sure who you are," he added. Hank looked at him and said, "Me neither." For the first time since they met, Nathan smiled. Barely, but it was real. And as the last light of day faded behind the hills, something new settled between them. Not resolution, not yet, but the beginning of something that might one day get there. The cemetery sat at the edge of town, just past a row of cotton trees that swayed in the breeze like they were whispering secrets. Hank hadn't brought Nathan there before. He wasn't sure if it was the right time, or if there ever would be one. But that morning, after coffee and few words, he simply said, "Let's go for a drive." Nathan didn't ask where. He just nodded, like he already knew. They stood in front of the simple gravestone, worn smooth by years of wind and Texas sun. It read, "Caleb Carver, 1986 to 2010. Ride hard, rest easy." Nathan stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes locked. On the name of a brother he never met. "I feel like I'm trespassing," he muttered. Hank glanced at him. "No, you belong here, same as him." The words came out heavy, like Hank was convincing himself as much as he was convincing Nathan. Silence between them was different now. Not awkward, just full. Nathan bent down and placed a hand on the dry grass near the headstone. "Do you come here often?" he asked. Hank shook his head. I used to. Then I stopped. Thought if I stayed away long enough, the pain might forget. How to find me? Nathan nodded, not judging. It never really does, he said. Hank looked at him, surprised. You know something about loss? Nathan didn't answer. He didn't have to. After a long moment, Hank spoke again. I blame myself for what happened. Not just because I pushed him too hard. I did. But because I didn't know him the way a father should. He looked down at the grave, his voice cracking slightly. I don't want to do that twice. Nathan's jaw tightened, and he stared straight ahead. Then don't, he said quietly. I'm right here. It was the first time Hank let himself cry in front of anyone since the funeral. Not loud, not messy. Just a slow breaking. Like a dam giving way after too many years. Nathan didn't move, didn't offer a hand. He just stood there, letting Hank feel it all, knowing sometimes silence was the most respectful kind of presence. When Hank finally looked up, something had shifted between them. A recognition, a choice to carry the pain together instead of alone. As they walked back to the truck, side by side, Nathan spoke without looking at him. You want to get lunch? Or something? Hank glanced at him and gave a tired smile. Yeah, he said. That sounds good. And just like that, for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel quite so empty. Fall crept in slowly that year, painting the fields in warm gold and deep rust. The air had changed, cooler in the mornings, quieter at night. At the Carver Ranch, things didn't move fast. They never had. But lately, the silence didn't feel as heavy. Nathan had started coming by on weekends, sometimes helping with fence repairs, sometimes just sitting on the porch, drinking coffee beside Hank without saying much. It was the kind of peace Hank hadn't known in decades. One Saturday morning, Hank found an old photo album in the back of a closet. He hadn't opened it in years, maybe since Eleanor passed. He brought it out to the porch, placed it on the table between them, and waited. Nathan didn't say a word. He just opened the worn cover and started flipping through. There were pictures of Caleb as a boy, Eleanor in the kitchen smiling, and one of Hank, young, strong, laughing like a man who thought he had all the time in the world. You looked different back then, Nathan said, half a grin tugging at his face. Hank nodded. I was different. Nathan paused on a photo of Caleb holding a rope, standing next to a young steer. He looks like me, he murmured. Hank leaned forward. You look like him too. Neither of them said anything after that for a long while, but the weight in the air had shifted again. Less like grief, more like memory finally allowed to breathe. That afternoon, they rode out together on horseback, something Nathan had never done before. Hank took him slow, across the pasture, down toward the creek that used to be Caleb's favorite spot. As they rode, Hank told stories. Some were funny, some weren't, but all of them were honest. And Nathan listened, not like someone judging, but like someone trying to understand where he came from, and maybe where he was going. As the sun began to dip low behind the hills, they sat side by side on their horses, looking out over the land. You think we'll ever be a real family? Nathan asked, voice quiet. Hank looked at him, no hesitation this time. We already are. It just doesn't look the way either of us imagined. Nathan nodded. Yeah, I guess that's all right. That night, as Hank watched Nathan's truck drive off down the dusty road, something settled in his chest. Not regret, not sadness, just peace. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running from something. He was standing still, right where he belonged,